Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
A new family. The first time I met my future stepdaughter, she looked at me for less than 2 seconds. Then she looked away. That was all.
No smile. No hello. No curiosity.
Nothing. If you have ever watched a movie about a happy blended family in America, you probably imagine a different scene. Maybe a little girl running toward her future stepmother. Maybe a warm hug. Maybe a funny conversation over ice cream.
My story was not like that.
Not even close. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in Ohio. The sky was bright blue. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Children were riding bicycles. People were walking dogs. Everything seemed calm and welcoming, except for the small storm standing in front of me. Her name was Emma. She was 10 years old, and she clearly did not want me there. At that time, I had been dating her father, Michael, for almost 2 years. Michael was kind, patient, and funny. He loved old country music. He made terrible pancakes every Sunday morning. And somehow I loved him even more because of it. When we first started dating, he told me something important. I have a daughter, he said. Then he paused. And she is my world. I respected that immediately. In America, family relationships can be complicated after divorce. Millions of children grow up moving between 2 homes. Many parents try their best to help their children adjust, but emotional wounds do not disappear overnight. Children often feel confused. Sometimes they feel abandoned. Sometimes they feel angry. Sometimes they worry that loving a new parent means betraying the old one. I understood all of that in theory. But theory feels very different when a child is staring through you as if you are invisible. The first family dinner was awkward. Actually, awkward is probably too gentle a word. Painful might be more accurate. Michael talked. I talked. Emma pushed food around her plate. When I asked about school, she shrugged. When I asked about her favorite book, she shrugged again. When I asked about her hobbies, she said exactly 3 words. I don't know. That was it. 3 words. Conversation over. You know what was funny? I had prepared for that dinner like it was a job interview. I researched children's books. I learned about popular American cartoons. I even practiced simple conversation topics. Meanwhile, Emma defeated every effort with the power of silence. Looking back now, I almost laugh. At the time, I wanted to cry. That night, driving home, I asked Michael a question. Does she hate me? He looked out the window for a moment. Then he sighed.
No.
The pause felt very long. She just doesn't know where you belong in her life yet. That answer stayed with me for years. Because the truth was simple. I didn't know where I belonged either. Was I a guest? A friend? An outsider? A future stepmother? A temporary person who might disappear one day? Nobody had given me a map. I was trying to navigate a new family without directions. Over the next several months, I kept showing up. Birthday parties, school events, soccer games, family barbecues, movie nights. I was there. Sometimes Emma ignored me. Sometimes she barely acknowledged me. Sometimes she acted as if I were a piece of furniture. An unusually talkative piece of furniture. One afternoon, I brought homemade cookies to Michael's house. I spent nearly 2 hours baking them. When Emma came into the kitchen, I felt hopeful. Maybe this would be a breakthrough. Maybe she would smile. Maybe she would say thank you. Instead, she took one cookie, looked at it carefully, and asked a question. Did my dad make these? My heart lifted. No, I said. I made them. She put the cookie back on the plate. Then she walked away. That moment hurt more than I expected. Not because of the cookie. Because it reminded me of something important. Love cannot be forced. Not in families. Not in friendships. Not in marriage. And definitely not with children. Many people quit when they don't see immediate results. That happens with relationships. It happens with fitness. It happens with learning English. A person studies for 2 weeks and says, "I'm not improving." A person practices speaking and says, "I'm still making mistakes." A person loves someone and says, "Nothing is changing." Then they give up. The problem is that most meaningful changes happen quietly, like seeds growing underground. You cannot see the roots. But the roots are growing anyway. At least that is what I hoped. Because honestly, there were days when I wanted to quit. Days when I felt exhausted. Days when I wondered if Emma would ever accept me. Days when I thought maybe I was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Then something happened. Not a miracle. Not a dramatic movie scene. Just a small moment. One evening, after a long soccer practice, Emma forgot her water bottle in the car. As she ran back toward the house, I picked it up and called her name. She turned around. For one brief second, our eyes met. And for the very first time, she smiled. It was tiny, barely visible, gone almost immediately. But it was real. A tiny crack in a very large wall. I did not know it then. But years later, that tiny smile would lead to a moment that would completely change my life. A moment involving one simple word. One word I had secretly dreamed of hearing. One word that seemed impossible. One word that would eventually heal years of silence, effort, disappointment, hope, and love. But before that word could arrive, our family would face challenges neither of us expected. And the hardest part of the journey had not even begun yet. Invisible walls. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong there, even when someone invited you? It is a strange feeling. Nobody tells you to leave. Nobody says anything rude. Yet somehow you feel like a visitor in a place where everyone else already knows the rules. That was exactly how I felt during my first year after marrying Michael. Looking back, I sometimes think I spent more energy trying to understand Emma than I spent understanding America itself. And that is saying something because America can be confusing. Every neighborhood has its own personality. Every family has its own traditions. Every state feels like a different country. But nothing was more difficult than trying to understand the silent world inside a 10-year-old girl's heart. A few months after our wedding, I officially moved into Michael's house. It was a beautiful home in a quiet Ohio suburb. The streets were lined with maple trees. Neighbors waved when they walked past. During autumn, the leaves turned bright shades of red and orange. It looked like something from a postcard. From the outside, we seemed like a happy American family beginning a new chapter together. Inside the house, however, there was an invisible wall. And that wall had a name.
Emma.
The strange thing was that she never openly fought with me. She never screamed. She never threw tantrums. She never told me she hated me. Sometimes I wished she would. At least then I would know what I was dealing with. Instead, she mastered a far more powerful weapon.
Distance.
She answered questions with one word. She avoided eye contact. She disappeared into her room whenever I entered a conversation. If Michael and I sat together in the living room, she suddenly remembered homework. If I offered to drive her somewhere, she preferred waiting for her father. If I cooked dinner, she thanked Michael. Not me. Michael. Even when he had done absolutely nothing except stand nearby. At first, I took everything personally. Every silence felt like rejection. Every cold response felt like failure. My brain became a detective searching for clues. Did I say something wrong? Did I move too fast? Did she think I was replacing her mother? Was I simply impossible to like? The funny thing about the human mind is that when information is missing, it creates stories. Usually bad stories. Psychologists often explain that uncertainty creates anxiety because the brain hates unanswered questions. When people do not know the truth, they often imagine something worse. That was exactly what I was doing. I was creating painful explanations for behavior I did not fully understand. One afternoon, I experienced a perfect example. Emma came home from school looking upset. Her eyes were red. She walked directly toward her room. Trying to be supportive, I gently asked if she was okay. She ignored me. Then she closed her bedroom door. Not slammed,
Closed.
but it felt like being locked out of a castle. For the rest of the evening I worried. Maybe she hated me more than ever. Maybe I had ruined something. Maybe she wanted me gone. Hours later, Michael spoke with her. The next morning he told me what happened. A friend had moved away. That was it. Nothing to do with me. My brain had built an entire emotional disaster from incomplete information. And honestly, many English learners do the same thing. They hear one conversation they cannot understand and immediately conclude they are terrible at English. They make one mistake while speaking and decide they are failing. Meanwhile, the reality is usually much less dramatic. Growth is often happening even when you cannot see it. Relationships work the same way. One evening something happened that I still remember clearly. It was family movie night.
Michael chose en animated film.
We made popcorn. Everything seemed normal. Halfway through the movie, Emma sat on one side of the couch. Michael sat in the middle. I sat on the other side. Then Michael got up to answer a phone call. For the first time, Emma and I were sitting alone together. The room suddenly felt very quiet. I could hear the television. I could hear the clock on the wall. I could hear my own nervous heartbeat. Then something unexpected happened. Emma laughed.
Not at me.
At the movie. But it was the first genuine laugh I had heard from her in weeks. Without thinking, I laughed too. For about 3 seconds, we were simply two people enjoying the same funny moment.
No labels.
No pressure. No complicated family dynamics. Just laughter. Then she noticed me laughing. Her smile disappeared immediately. She turned back toward the television. The invisible wall returned. Yet something about those 3 seconds stayed with me. Because walls do not appear instantly. And they do not disappear instantly either. They crack slowly. Very slowly. Like ice melting at the end of winter. The next few months continued much the same way. Small progress. Long setbacks. Tiny victories nobody else noticed. One day, she thanked me for helping with a school project. Another day, she ignored me completely. One week, she joined a conversation at dinner. The next week, she barely spoke. It felt like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes 3 steps back. Honestly, there were moments when I wanted to stop trying. Not because I stopped caring. Because caring hurt. The hardest part of loving someone is accepting that they may not love you back immediately. Or at all. Many people quit at this stage. Not because they are bad people. Because disappointment is exhausting. You keep investing emotional energy and wonder if anything is changing. You keep showing up and receive very little in return. You keep hoping. And hope can feel heavy when it takes years. Then one rainy afternoon, something happened that changed the direction of our story. At first, it seemed completely unimportant. A tiny moment. Easy to miss. The kind of thing most people would forget by dinner. But I never forgot it. Because it was the first sign that Emma was finally beginning to see me differently. Not as an intruder. Not as a replacement. Not as a stranger living in her house. Something else. Something neither of us fully understood yet. I remember standing near the kitchen window, watching rain fall across the backyard. Michael was working late. The house was unusually quiet. Emma was upstairs. Then I heard a loud crash, followed by complete silence. A silence so sudden and strange that it immediately caught my attention. I looked toward the staircase. My heart started beating faster. And before I could move, I heard Emma call out from upstairs. Not her father. Not anyone else.
Me.
For the very first time. And what happened next would become one of the most important moments of our entire journey. The long silence. If you have ever planted a seed, you know something frustrating about nature. You water the soil. You wait. You check every day. Nothing happens. A week passes. Still nothing. Another week passes. Nothing again. Then one morning, almost by magic, a tiny green sprout appears. Relationships can feel exactly the same way. Especially when you are trying to build a relationship with a child who never asked for you to be part of her life. Looking back now, I think the hardest season of my journey with Emma was not the rejection. It was the uncertainty. Rejection at least gives you an answer. Uncertainty leaves you wondering whether anything is growing beneath the surface at all. The day Emma called for me from upstairs was not dramatic in the way movies usually show dramatic moments. There was no emotional music playing in the background. No life-changing speech. No tears running down anyone's face. What happened was much simpler. I ran upstairs and found her sitting on the floor beside her desk. A stack of books had fallen from a shelf. One of the shelves had partially broken. Nothing serious. Nobody was hurt. Still, something felt different. For the first time, when she needed help and her father wasn't home, she had called my name. Not because she liked me. Not because she trusted me completely. But because somewhere inside her mind, I had become a possible source of help. That tiny detail mattered more than she realized. As we cleaned up the books together, neither of us said much. Actually, almost all of our conversations at that time were painfully short. Need help? Okay. Thanks. You're welcome. Sometimes our entire interaction for a day could fit on a sticky note. If someone had recorded our conversations, it would have sounded less like a family and more like two strangers waiting for a delayed flight at an airport. Yet something interesting was happening. The silence was changing. At first, silence had felt cold. Now it felt uncertain. And uncertain was better. Much better. Psychologists often talk about emotional safety. Human beings naturally protect themselves after painful experiences. Children especially do this. After divorce, many children build invisible emotional defenses. Those defenses are not designed to hurt other people. They are designed to prevent further pain. Emma wasn't fighting me. She was protecting herself. The moment I finally understood that, everything started looking different. Instead of asking, "Why doesn't she like me?" I began asking, "What is she afraid of losing?" That question changed everything. One Saturday morning, Michael left early to help a friend move into a new apartment. For several hours, Emma and I were alone in the house. Normally, that situation would have been awkward. Very awkward. But on that particular day, something unusual happened. The power went out.
Just like that.
No television. No internet.
No lights. No distractions.
Outside, a storm moved across the neighborhood. Rain tapped against the windows. The sky grew dark. For a while, we stayed in separate rooms. Then boredom began doing what boredom does best. It forced human beings to interact. I found an old board game hidden in a closet. Nothing exciting. Just a dusty game that had probably not been touched in years. I placed it on the kitchen table. I didn't ask Emma to play. I didn't pressure her. I simply started playing by myself. 10 minutes later, I noticed movement. Emma appeared in the doorway. She looked at the game. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at the game again. Without saying anything, she sat down. That was it. No speech.
No announcement. No magical transformation.
She simply sat down, and for the next hour, we played. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she became hilariously competitive. At one point, she accused me of cheating. I wasn't cheating. At least I don't think I was. The important thing wasn't the game. The important thing was that for 60 minutes, we existed together without the invisible wall controlling everything. When Michael returned home later that day, Emma was actually telling me a story about school. A short story. A very short story. But still a story. Michael nearly dropped his car keys. I could see the surprise on his face. Honestly, I felt surprised too. That evening, after Emma went upstairs, Michael smiled. You know, he said, that might be the longest conversation she's ever had with you. We both laughed. But inside, I felt something dangerous. Hope. Hope is wonderful. Hope is also terrifying. Because once you start hoping, disappointment becomes possible again. Over the following months, our relationship continued changing in small, almost invisible ways. Emma started asking occasional questions. What was school like when you were young? What was your favorite subject? Did you always live in Ohio? Simple questions. Normal questions. Yet each one felt like discovering hidden treasure. The funny thing about human connection is that it rarely grows through grand gestures. Movies teach us to expect dramatic moments. Real life usually works differently. Relationships grow through repeated, ordinary experiences. A shared meal, a short conversation, a joke, a ride to school, a board game during a power outage.
Teen moments.
Tiny moments repeated hundreds of times. That is how trust is built. And trust was slowly appearing. At least that is what I believed. Then something happened that nearly destroyed my confidence again. One afternoon, I arrived early to pick Emma up from school. Students were leaving the building. Parents waited near the entrance. Everything seemed normal. Then I heard a conversation. Emma was speaking with one of her classmates. The other girl asked a simple question. Is that your mom? I froze. Not intentionally. My body simply stopped moving. For a second, the world felt strangely quiet. I could hear my heartbeat. I could hear the wind. I could hear children laughing nearby. Most of all, I could hear Emma, because her answer was about to tell me something important. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. Part of me hoped she would say yes. Another part of me feared the answer completely. After all, I had spent years trying to become part of her life. Years trying to earn her trust. Years trying to prove that I wasn't going anywhere. Now, standing outside that school, I realized I was about to learn how she truly saw me. And when the answer finally came, it surprised me more than anything else that had happened so far. Not because it was cruel. Not because it was kind. Because it revealed a truth I had completely failed to understand. A truth that would change the direction of our relationship forever. When I wanted to give up. Have you ever spent so much time trying to fix something that you forgot how tired you were? Not the kind of tired that sleep can solve. I mean the quiet kind. The kind that settles deep inside your chest. The kind that whispers, maybe this isn't working. That was where I found myself during the 3rd year of my relationship with Emma. From the outside, everything looked fine. We lived in a comfortable home in Ohio. Michael and I had a stable marriage. Emma was doing well in school. We had family dinners. We celebrated birthdays. We took photos during holidays. If someone saw our Christmas pictures, they would probably think we were one of those happy American families from a television commercial. But pictures only show faces. They do not show feelings. And behind every smile I gave the camera, there was a question I never stopped asking myself. Was I actually becoming part of this family, or was I simply getting better at pretending? The answer became harder to find after what happened outside Emma's school. Standing there that afternoon, I listened carefully as her friend asked, "Is that your mom?" My heart felt like it stopped for a second. Emma looked toward me. Then she looked back at her friend. "No," she answered. There was a short pause. "But she lives with us." The words were not cruel.
She did not sound angry.
She was simply stating a fact. Yet somehow those 6 words felt heavier than 1,000 insults. But she lives with us. Not family. Not mom. Not even stepmom. Just a person who happened to share the same house. That night I smiled through dinner. I laughed when appropriate. I asked about school. I acted normal. But inside, something cracked. Later, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at a cup of cold tea. The house was silent. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. Outside, snow drifted across the streetlights. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I felt completely defeated. The human brain has a strange habit. When we are exhausted, we stop noticing progress and start collecting evidence of failure. Psychologists call this negativity bias. Our minds naturally focus on threats and disappointments more than successes. From an evolutionary perspective, it helped humans survive. Unfortunately, it is terrible for happiness. That night, my brain became a professional prosecutor. It presented every painful memory as evidence. Remember when she ignored your birthday gift? Remember when she thanked Michael instead of you? Remember when she left the room every time you entered? Remember the school parking lot? The case against me was growing stronger by the minute. By midnight, I had convinced myself of something dangerous. Maybe I was never going to be enough. The next morning, I almost did something I would later regret. I decided to stop trying. Not completely. Just enough to protect myself. No more extra effort. No more emotional investment. No more hoping. After all, hope was becoming expensive. If you have ever learned English for months without seeing results, you know this feeling. You study vocabulary. You practice listening. You watch videos. You repeat phrases. Then one day you still cannot understand a fast conversation. Suddenly your brain says, "Why bother?" The temptation to quit arrives quietly. It rarely announces itself. It simply asks whether continuing is worth the pain. For several weeks, I became emotionally cautious. I still cooked meals. I still attended family events. I still helped when needed.
But I stopped reaching.
I stopped initiating conversations. I stopped looking for opportunities to connect. The difference was subtle. Nobody else noticed it at first. But something surprising happened. Emma noticed immediately. Not because she suddenly loved me. Because consistency had become part of her world. One evening we were eating dinner when she looked up from her plate. "You didn't come to my soccer practice yesterday." The question surprised me. I almost dropped my fork. "Oh," I said carefully. "I had some work to finish." She nodded. Then she returned to eating. That was the entire conversation. Yet it stayed in my mind all night. Because for the first time, she had noticed my absence. The next week something similar happened. A school science fair was approaching. Normally I would have offered help. This time I stayed quiet. To my surprise, Emma appeared beside me in the living room. "Do you know how to make a volcano project?" I looked up. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled. "Actually, I do." That weekend we spent nearly 4 hours building the project together. There were glue sticks everywhere, paint on the table, cardboard on the floor. At one point the volcano collapsed completely. At another point we accidentally created something that looked more like a giant potato than a volcano. Emma laughed so hard, she nearly fell out of her chair. And for the first time in years, I forgot to measure every interaction. I forgot to wonder whether she accepted me. I forgot to analyze every word. We were simply having fun. The strange thing about relationships is that they often improve the moment you stop trying to force them. Children especially can sense pressure. When every interaction carries expectations, they feel it. When love becomes patient and quiet, they feel that too. Winter slowly turned into spring. The snow disappeared. Trees began growing leaves again. Life moved forward. Then one evening, Michael found me sitting on the back porch. The sun was setting. The sky glowed orange and gold. For a while we simply watched the neighborhood grow darker. Finally he spoke. "You know she's changing, right?" I laughed softly. "Some days it doesn't feel that way." He smiled. Then he said something I never forgot. "She's starting to trust you. The problem is that trust grows so slowly, you can't see it happening. Trust grows so slowly." The sentence stayed with me, because he was right. A tree does not become tall overnight. A family does not become strong overnight. A child does not open her heart overnight. Everything meaningful seems to require more patience than we want to give. What I did not know was that our biggest test was approaching. Not a small misunderstanding. Not another awkward conversation. A real challenge. One that would force Emma and me closer together than ever before. One that neither of us could avoid. And strangely enough, it would begin with a phone call on an ordinary afternoon. A phone call that would make my heart race the moment I answered. A phone call that would change everything. A lesson from a father. Some of the most important lessons in life arrive when you are completely exhausted. Not when you are confident. Not when you are winning. Not when everything makes sense. They arrive when you are sitting in your car after a difficult day, staring through the windshield, wondering why your best efforts never seem to be enough. That was exactly where I found myself a few days after Michael's phone call changed everything. Looking back now, I realize I was standing at a crossroads. One path led toward frustration, disappointment, and emotional distance. The other path led toward understanding. At the time, however, I could not see either road clearly. The phone call came on a gray Thursday afternoon. I was grocery shopping. The cart was half full. Milk,
bread,
apples,
coffee.
normal things. Then my phone rang. It was the school. Immediately, my stomach tightened. Most parents understand that feeling. Schools rarely call in the middle of the day to announce wonderful surprises. I answered quickly. The voice on the other end sounded calm, but concerned. Emma had fallen during gym class. Nothing life-threatening. Nothing serious. But she had injured her ankle and needed someone to pick her up. Michael was working nearly 2 hours away. I was the closest adult available. Without hesitation, I drove straight to the school. When I arrived, Emma was sitting in the nurse's office. She looked embarrassed, more than injured. Children often do. Physical pain is one thing. Embarrassment is another. As soon as she saw me, her expression changed slightly. Not happiness. Not relief. Something more complicated. Perhaps disappointment that her father wasn't there. Perhaps uncertainty. Maybe both. The drive home was quiet. Very quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Traffic moved slowly. For nearly 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Emma surprised me. Did Dad sound worried? I glanced toward her. A simple question. Yet hidden inside was something much deeper. She wasn't asking about her ankle. She was asking whether her father cared. Whether she still mattered. Whether she remained the center of his world. Children rarely ask the question they truly want answered. Instead, they circle around it. Carefully. Quietly. I smiled, very worried. Her shoulders relaxed almost immediately. Then she stared out the window again. At the time, I did not fully understand what I had just witnessed. But Michael did. That evening, after Emma had gone upstairs to rest, he sat beside me in the kitchen. The house felt peaceful. The rain had stopped. Outside, the neighborhood lights glowed softly in the darkness. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Michael said something that would completely change the way I viewed Emma. You know what she's afraid of, right? I looked at him.
No.
He nodded slowly. She's afraid of losing people. The sentence landed heavily, because suddenly dozens of confusing moments began making sense. Michael leaned back in his chair. When her mom and I divorced, everything changed.
His voice was calm.
Not angry, not bitter, just honest. Adults understand divorce differently than children do. We know relationships can fail.
Kids don't see it that way.
I listened carefully, because I knew something important was coming. When families break apart, he continued, children often assume that everyone leaves eventually. I felt my chest tighten, not because the idea was complicated, because it was painfully simple. Children do not analyze relationships like adults. They experience them. If someone disappears once, they begin expecting everyone else to disappear too. Psychologists call this attachment insecurity. Research shows that major family transitions can make children more cautious about emotional connections. They become protective. They hesitate to trust. Not because they want to be difficult, because trusting feels risky. Suddenly Emma's behavior looked completely different. She wasn't building walls to keep me out. She was building walls to protect herself. That realization hit me harder than anything else had so far. For years, I had viewed the situation from my perspective, my effort, my disappointment, my frustration, my hope. Now, for the first time, I saw the story through Emma's eyes. Imagine being 10 years old. Your parents separate. Your world changes. Your routines change. Your holidays change. Your home changes. Then one day another adult arrives. Everyone expects you to welcome this new person. Trust this new person. Love this new person. But what if they leave too? What if caring only creates more pain? Suddenly her distance made perfect sense. And honestly, the lesson applies far beyond family. Many English learners experience something similar. After enough failures, people stop trusting progress. They study for months. Nothing seems to improve. Then they assume future effort will fail too. Past disappointment becomes evidence against future success. The brain starts protecting itself. Exactly like Emma. Exactly like millions of people. Exactly like me. That conversation with Michael lasted nearly 2 hours. By the end, I understood something life-changing. Love is not a reward for good behavior. Love is not a transaction. Love is not earned through perfect performance. Real love creates safety first. Connection comes later. The next morning, I made a decision. I would stop measuring success by whether Emma accepted me. Instead, I would focus on becoming consistently present. No pressure.
No expectations.
No secret scoreboard. Just presence. At first, the change felt strange. When she ignored me, I stayed patient. When conversations ended quickly, I stayed relaxed. When progress felt slow, I reminded myself that trust grows quietly. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Something interesting began happening. The less pressure I created, the more comfortable Emma seemed. Not dramatically. Gradually. One afternoon, she asked me to help with homework. Another day, she showed me a drawing she had made. Later, she asked my opinion about a school project.
Tin moments.
tiny cracks appearing in a wall that once seemed impossible to break. The funny thing is that none of these moments looked important individually. If you filmed them, they would seem ordinary, forgettable. But relationships are built from ordinary moments, not extraordinary ones. Brick by brick, conversation by conversation,
day by day.
Then came the moment that truly convinced me something was changing. It happened during a family gathering at Michael's parents' house. Nothing unusual was supposed to happen. Just dinner. Just relatives. Just another normal weekend. At least that's what I thought. Because somewhere between dessert and coffee, I overheard a conversation that completely stopped me in my tracks. A conversation involving Emma. A conversation she didn't know I could hear. And for the first time in years, I learned what she was saying about me when I wasn't in the room. What I heard next nearly brought tears to my eyes. Small things that matter. Have you ever noticed how some of the biggest changes in life begin so quietly that you almost miss them? Not with fireworks. Not with dramatic speeches. Not with some magical moment where everything suddenly becomes perfect. Real change is usually much sneakier. It hides inside ordinary days. It slips into routine conversations. It grows while nobody is paying attention. Looking back now, I think that was exactly what happened between Emma and me. For years, I had been searching for a breakthrough. A clear sign. A big emotional moment that would tell me everything was finally changing. What I didn't realize was that the breakthrough had already started. I was simply looking in the wrong direction. The family gathering at Michael's parents' house was supposed to be completely ordinary. A typical American weekend. Good food. Too many desserts. Relatives telling the same stories they told every year. Nothing unusual. At least that was the plan. The house was full of conversation. Children ran through the hallways. Football played softly on a television in the living room. Outside, the late spring air felt warm and comfortable. At one point, I stepped into the kitchen to help clean up after dinner. While carrying dishes toward the sink, I accidentally overheard a conversation happening nearby. Emma was talking with one of her cousins. I wasn't trying to listen. Honestly, I almost walked away. Then I heard my name. Immediately I froze. Not dramatically. Just enough to hear what came next. Her cousin asked a simple question. Do you like having a stepmom? I expected hesitation. I expected uncertainty. I expected one of those vague answers Emma had always mastered. Instead, there was a brief pause. Then Emma shrugged. She's nice. That was it. 2 words. She's nice. To almost anyone else, those words would sound completely unremarkable. But to me, they felt enormous. Because a few years earlier, she would have described me as practically invisible. Now she was voluntarily defending me in a conversation where I wasn't even present. For the rest of the evening, I could barely stop smiling. Not because I had become her mother. Not because every problem was solved. Because progress had become real. The funny thing about emotional growth is that it rarely announces itself. You only recognize it when you compare today to years ago. Just like learning English. Many learners think they are not improving because progress feels slow. Then one day they watch an old video, read an old journal entry, or remember how difficult simple conversations used to be. Suddenly they realize how far they have come. Growth hides in repetition. Relationships do the same thing. After that weekend, I made a conscious decision. I would stop focusing on what Emma still wasn't giving me. Instead, I would focus on what she was already giving. A smile. A question. A conversation.
Trust.
Tiny things. Because tiny things often become big things later. That shift changed everything. One afternoon, Emma came home from school carrying a backpack that looked heavier than she did. She dropped it beside the kitchen table and sighed dramatically. Long day? I asked. She rolled her eyes. The longest. Normally, that would have ended the conversation. This time, she kept talking. A difficult math test. A disagreement with a friend. A teacher who assigned too much homework. For nearly 15 minutes, she described her day. I mostly listened. And that is when I discovered something important. People often think connection comes from giving great advice. Usually it comes from listening. Research in psychology consistently shows that feeling understood creates emotional safety. Human beings bond more deeply when they feel heard rather than judged. So instead of trying to solve every problem, I listened. Sometimes I asked questions. Sometimes I simply nodded. The results surprised me. The more I listened, the more she talked. The more she talked, the more comfortable she became. Weeks passed. Summer arrived. Ohio transformed into green parks, backyard cookouts, and long sunny evenings. For the first time, our house started feeling less like separate worlds sharing the same address. It began feeling like a family. Not perfect, just real. One Saturday morning, Michael had to work unexpectedly. Emma and I found ourselves alone again. Years earlier, that situation would have felt uncomfortable. Now it felt normal. We decided to visit a local farmer's market. Nothing exciting. Fresh fruit. Homemade bread. Local vendors. The kind of simple American weekend activity that rarely appears in movies. Yet something happened there that I still remember clearly. While we were walking between vendor booths, Emma suddenly grabbed my arm. Not because she was scared. Not because she needed help. Just naturally. Without thinking. The gesture lasted only a few seconds. But it told me something words never could. Comfort had arrived. Real comfort. The kind that cannot be forced. The kind that develops slowly through hundreds of ordinary experiences. Later that day, I thought about attachment theory, a concept often discussed by psychologists. Strong relationships are not built through perfection. They are built through reliability, through showing up again and again, through becoming predictable in the best possible way. That realization explained everything. Emma wasn't learning to trust me because I had done something extraordinary. She trusted me because I kept showing up. Birthday after birthday. Holiday after holiday. School project after school project. Conversation after conversation. The consistency mattered more than any single event. And yet, despite all this progress, one challenge remained. A big one. Emma still never called me Mom. Not once. She used my first name. Always. And honestly, I understood why. The title belonged to someone else. Someone important. Someone she already loved. I never wanted to replace her mother. Never. But if I'm being honest, a small secret part of my heart still wondered. Would that day ever come? Would she ever see me that way? Or was I hoping for something impossible? The answer seemed impossible to predict. Some days I thought maybe yes. Other days I thought probably not. Then life delivered another unexpected challenge. The kind nobody plans for. The kind that reveals what people truly mean to one another. It began late one evening. The house was quiet. Michael and I were getting ready for bed. Everything felt normal. Then the phone rang. Not during the day. Not during dinner. Late at night. The kind of phone call that immediately makes your heart beat faster. Michael answered first. I watched his expression change. Then change again. Within seconds, all the color disappeared from his face. And before he even spoke, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. What happened next would test our family more than anything we had faced before. And strangely, it would bring Emma and me closer than ever. The winter we never forgot. Some seasons change the weather. Other seasons change people. If you ask me today which period transformed my relationship with Emma more than any other, I would not choose a birthday, a holiday, or a family celebration. I would choose one long winter. A winter that arrived quietly and left behind a completely different family. The strange thing is that when life-changing moments first appear, they rarely look important. They arrive disguised as ordinary problems. A phone call, a storm, a difficult week, something small enough to ignore, until it changes everything. The late-night phone call came on a Tuesday. Michael answered first. I watched his expression carefully. Within seconds, his face turned pale. He listened silently. Then he thanked the caller and hung up. For a moment, he simply stared at the wall. Nobody spoke. Finally, I asked the obvious question. What happened? He took a slow breath. It's Emma's mom. Immediately, my stomach tightened. Even after all those years, her mother remained an important part of Emma's world. Nothing would ever change that. Is she okay? I asked. Michael hesitated. Not exactly. The next hour felt like a blur. There had been a serious accident. Not fatal. Thankfully not fatal. But severe enough to require surgery and a lengthy recovery. Suddenly, everything changed. Emma's mother would be unable to care for her for several months. That meant Emma would be staying with us full-time. Not weekends. Not shared schedules. Not alternating homes. Every day. Every week. For months. The news hit Emma harder than anyone expected. Children often appear stronger than adults realize. But beneath that strength, they carry fears they rarely express. The next afternoon, when we explained the situation, Emma nodded quietly. She asked practical questions. She seemed calm, almost too calm. That night, however, I heard something unexpected.
Crying.
Soft crying, coming from her room. I stood outside her door, unsure what to do, unsure whether I should enter, unsure whether she wanted comfort or privacy. For several minutes, I remained frozen. Then I remembered something Michael once told me. Show up, even when you don't know exactly how. I knocked gently. No answer. I waited. Then I knocked again. Still nothing. Slowly I opened the door. Emma sat on her bed. Tears rolled down her face. She looked smaller than usual. Not physically. Emotionally. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at a distant teenager. I was looking at a scared child. A child worried about her mother. A child worried about uncertainty. A child worried about losing someone she loved. Without thinking, I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence is more helpful than words. Research on emotional regulation suggests that human beings often calm down not through advice, but through co-regulation. In simple terms, another person's calm presence helps our nervous system feel safe. That evening, I didn't try to fix anything. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed. Eventually, Emma leaned against my shoulder. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. Yet I felt it immediately. For years, she had kept emotional distance between us. Now, during one of the hardest moments of her life, she chose proximity. The significance nearly broke my heart. The following weeks were difficult. Very difficult. Winter storms arrived across Ohio. Temperatures dropped. Roads froze. The days became shorter. Meanwhile, our family was adjusting to a completely new reality. Emma worried constantly about her mother. Michael worried about everyone, and I worried about all of them. Yet something remarkable began happening. Our routines changed. Every morning I helped Emma prepare for school. Every afternoon I picked her up. Every evening we shared dinner. Not because we planned some grand bonding strategy. Because life required it. And life, strangely enough, became our greatest teacher. One snowy afternoon, A major storm swept through our town. Schools closed early. Road conditions became dangerous. By evening, electricity failed across several neighborhoods, including ours. Suddenly, the house was dark. No television. No internet.
No phones charging.
Outside, snow covered everything. The world looked frozen. Inside, we gathered around candles and blankets. At first, it felt inconvenient. Then something unexpected happened. We started talking. Really talking. Without screens. Without distractions. Without escaping into separate rooms. Hours passed. Michael shared stories from his childhood. I shared embarrassing memories from school. Emma laughed harder than I had ever seen before. Then she started sharing stories too. Funny stories. Sad stories. Stories about her mother. Stories about her fears. Stories she had apparently been carrying alone for years. At one point she admitted something that stunned me. I thought if I got close to you, my mom would be hurt. The room became completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. For years I had wondered why she resisted our relationship. Now I finally understood. Children often believe love has limited space. They think loving one person means betraying another. Adults know the heart can expand. Children are still learning that lesson. I smiled softly. You never had to choose. Her eyes filled with tears. Mine probably did too, because that single misunderstanding had shaped years of distance. Years. And now it was finally being spoken aloud. The storm continued through the night. Snow piled higher outside. The power remained out. Yet inside the house, something felt lighter than it had in years. Like a heavy door had finally opened. Over the next several weeks, our connection deepened faster than ever before. Not because we forced it, because trust had reached a tipping point. Psychologists often describe relationships as emotional bank accounts. Small positive interactions accumulate over time. Eventually enough trust exists to support deeper vulnerability. That was exactly what was happening. The years of showing up. The years of patience. The years of tiny moments. They were finally paying interest. Then came a moment I'll never forget. A moment so small that most people would probably miss its importance. Yet it became one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. It happened during a visit to see her mother. Everything seemed normal. We sat together in the hospital room. We talked. We laughed. Then, as we prepared to leave, Emma reached for my hand. Not for balance. Not because she needed help. Just naturally. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. And for the first time, her mother noticed it too. The look that crossed her face surprised me completely. Because instead of jealousy, she smiled. A quiet smile. A knowing smile. A smile that seemed to say she understood something important before any of us did. And what happened after that visit would bring us one step closer to the moment I had secretly dreamed about for years. The moment involving a single word. The word that still hadn't been spoken, yet somehow felt closer than ever before. The first signs. Sometimes the most important moments in a relationship are the ones nobody else notices. Not birthdays. Not holidays. Not dramatic speeches. Just small moments that seem ordinary at the time. A question asked in the kitchen. A smile during a difficult day. A hand reaching for yours without thinking. Looking back now, I realize that the period after Emma's mother's accident became the season when everything truly began to change. Not suddenly. Not perfectly. But undeniably. The walls that had taken years to build were finally beginning to come down. The hospital visit stayed in my mind for days. Not because of the accident. Not because of the recovery process. Because of that smile. Emma's mother had seen her daughter reach for my hand. And instead of looking uncomfortable, She looked relieved. At first, I couldn't understand why. Then one evening, several weeks later, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Emma's mother. The conversation began politely. We talked about Emma,
School.
recovery, daily life, normal topics. Then she said something I never expected to hear. Thank you for being there for her.
For a moment, I didn't know what to say.
The words caught me completely off guard. She continued speaking before I could respond. You know, for a long time she felt guilty. My chest tightened. Because I already suspected what she meant. Guilty for caring about me. Guilty for getting close. Guilty for loving more than one parental figure. The burden children often carry without realizing it. I kept telling her she didn't need to choose, her mother said softly. But children don't always believe us. I stared out the window while listening. The evening sun painted long shadows across the backyard. Everything felt unusually quiet. Then she said something that stayed with me forever. The heart isn't a small apartment. More people can live there. I smiled. Because it was true. Love expands. It does not divide. Yet many people spend years fearing the opposite. After that conversation, I noticed subtle changes in Emma almost immediately. The first sign appeared during breakfast. A tiny moment. Easy to miss. I was making pancakes. Not Michael.
Me.
Years earlier, Emma would have walked into the kitchen, eaten silently, and left. This time she sat at the counter, watching. Why do yours always look better than Dad's? I laughed. Because your father believes measurements are optional. She laughed too. Then she added something unexpected. That's true. It wasn't the joke that mattered. It was the shared laughter. For years, most conversations had felt careful. Now, they felt natural. And natural was a beautiful thing. Psychologists often explain that trust changes communication patterns. When people feel emotionally safe, their conversations become more spontaneous. They stop monitoring every word. They stop protecting every feeling. They simply interact. That was exactly what was happening, day by day. Conversation by conversation. The changes continued. One afternoon after school, I noticed Emma sitting unusually quietly at the kitchen table. Normally, she would head straight to her room. This time she stayed. Something was clearly bothering her. Eventually I asked, "Rough day?" She nodded. For a moment, I expected the conversation to end there. Instead, she surprised me. A disagreement with a close friend. A misunderstanding. A painful rumor spreading through school. The kind of social drama that feels world-ending when you're young. As she spoke, I listened carefully. Not because I had perfect advice. Because I remembered how much being heard matters. Research consistently shows that emotional support often reduces stress more effectively than problem solving. Human beings feel stronger when they feel understood. So I listened. When she finished, I asked one simple question. What do you think you want to do? She looked thoughtful. Then she answered. And for the next 20 minutes we talked. Not stepmother and stepdaughter. Not adults and children. Just two people sharing a difficult moment. Afterward, she looked visibly lighter. So did I. Weeks passed. Summer arrived fully. School ended. The days became longer. Our routines changed again. Family road trips. Outdoor festivals. Backyard dinners. Movie nights. Simple American summer traditions. And slowly, without either of us realizing it, a new habit developed. Emma started seeking me out. At first, it happened occasionally. A question about school. An opinion about clothes. Help with a project. Then, it became more frequent. One evening, Michael laughed while watching us discuss a television show. You know something funny? He said. We looked at him. You two talk more than either of you realize. The comment made all three of us laugh. Yet he was right. The silence that once defined our relationship was disappearing. Replacing it were conversations, opinions, stories, inside jokes. The invisible wall was no longer invisible because it was no longer there. Then came a moment that completely surprised me. A moment so small that most people would overlook it, but I never forgot. We were shopping for school supplies. One of the least exciting activities imaginable. Crowded stores, long lines, too many notebooks, not enough patience. At one point, we became separated briefly in the crowd. Nothing serious, only a few seconds. Then I heard Emma calling, not loudly, just enough to get my attention. I turned immediately, and there she was, looking relieved. The expression lasted only a moment, yet it revealed something important. She expected me to be there. She counted on me being there. Trust had become normal. The realization felt almost unreal. Years earlier, she barely acknowledged my existence. Now my presence provided comfort. The transformation was extraordinary precisely because it happened so gradually, like watching a tree grow. You don't see it happen. Then one day you realize it's much taller than before. By late summer, Emma's mother had recovered enough to resume normal life. Everyone celebrated. It was wonderful news. Yet something interesting happened. Instead of returning completely to old routines, our family kept many of the new ones. Shared dinners, weekend outings, movie nights, long conversations. The bonds created during difficult times remained. And that was when I began noticing something else. Something that made my heart race every time it happened. Several times, while speaking quickly, Emma almost slipped. Almost. Not completely.
She would start a sentence. Pause.
Correct herself. Then continue. The first time I thought I imagined it. The second time I became curious. The third time I became certain. She was stopping herself from saying something. Something she wasn't quite ready to say. Not yet. But the possibility suddenly felt real. For years, the word mom had seemed impossible. Now it felt closer than ever. Still, expectations can create disappointment. So, I stayed patient. I stayed present. I stayed grateful. Because honestly, I already had more than I ever thought possible. Then autumn arrived. And with it came a family event that would change everything. An event filled with relatives, memories, laughter, and one unexpected moment that nobody could have predicted. A moment that would finally answer the question I had been carrying in my heart for years. A moment involving a single word. A single word that had the power to heal everything. Family is more than blood. Have you ever noticed that some truths take years to understand even when they're standing right in front of you? You hear them. You read them. People repeat them over and over. Yet somehow they remain just words. Then one day life gives you an experience that changes everything. Suddenly those words become real. That was exactly what happened to me during the autumn after Emma's mother's recovery. For years I had heard people say that family is more than blood. It sounded nice. It sounded comforting. But I don't think I truly understood it until I watched our family navigate one of the most unexpected chapters of our lives. The leaves were changing color across Ohio. Golden, orange, deep red. The air felt cooler every morning. Football season had returned. Pumpkin decorations appeared on front porches throughout the neighborhood. Everything felt normal again, at least on the surface. Emma's mother had recovered well. School was going smoothly. Life had regained its routine. Yet something fundamental had changed. Our family dynamics were different, stronger, more connected, and nobody seemed eager to return to the emotional distance that once defined our lives. One Saturday afternoon, we attended a community fall festival. If you've ever visited a small American town during autumn, you know the atmosphere. Food trucks, live music, children running between booths, the smell of apple cider and cinnamon everywhere. It felt like one of those simple moments that people later remember for decades. While walking through the festival, I noticed something unusual. Emma naturally moved beside me. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. A few years earlier, she would have walked several steps ahead, or behind, or somewhere completely different. Now she stayed close. The change felt almost unbelievable. And yet it had happened so gradually that neither of us noticed when it began. Human relationships often work that way. Major transformations arrive disguised as small daily habits. A conversation here, a shared laugh there, a difficult moment survived together. Eventually the accumulation becomes visible. Later that evening, we gathered around the dinner table. Michael's parents had joined us. The conversation moved from school to holidays to family memories. At one point, Michael's father asked a simple question. What was everyone's favorite childhood tradition? The answers were predictable at first. Christmas mornings, summer vacations, birthday parties. Then it was Emma's turn. She thought quietly for a moment. Everyone waited. Then she smiled. My favorite tradition is movie night. The answer surprised me. Movie night wasn't an old tradition. It had started during the difficult months after her mother's accident. A tradition we created together. Every Friday evening.
Pizza.
Blankets. A movie. No phones allowed. Nothing complicated. Yet somehow it had become meaningful. The realization warmed my heart more than I expected. Psychologists often discuss shared rituals as one of the strongest predictors of family connection. Families create identity through repeated experiences. The traditions themselves matter less than the consistency they represent. Movie night wasn't really about movies. It was about belonging. And Emma had just confirmed that, without even realizing it. The weeks continued passing. Halloween arrived. Then November. Then Thanksgiving. One of the biggest family holidays in the United States. If you've never experienced an American Thanksgiving, imagine enormous amounts of food, relatives everywhere, and conversations that somehow last all day. That year, our family hosted. Everyone contributed something.
Turkey. Pie.
Mashed potatoes. Far too many desserts. The house filled with warmth and laughter. For most of the afternoon, I stayed busy helping in the kitchen.
Cooking.
Cleaning. Organizing. The usual holiday chaos. Then something happened that stopped me completely. A distant relative I barely knew arrived late. After greeting everyone, she looked around the room. Then she pointed toward Emma. Is that your daughter? The question wasn't unusual. People asked it often. Still, my heart skipped a beat. Not because of the question. Because Emma was standing close enough to hear it. For a brief second, our eyes met. Neither of us spoke. The relative waited. The room continued buzzing with conversation. Nobody else seemed to notice the moment. Yet for me, time felt slower. Years of memories flashed through my mind. The first cold stare. The silent dinners. The awkward conversations. The tears. The patience. The hope. Everything. Then I smiled politely. Before I could answer, however, Emma spoke first. She's family. 3 words. Only 3. Yet they hit me harder than I can describe. She's family. Not a visitor. Not someone who lives with us. Not an outsider. Family. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Thankfully, nobody seemed to notice. Everyone simply continued talking. The moment passed. Yet internally, everything felt different. Because that answer revealed something important. Family isn't defined solely by by biology. It is built through care, through trust, through presence, through showing up repeatedly when life becomes difficult. Blood can create a connection. Love strengthens it. That evening, after everyone left, I sat quietly in the living room. The house felt peaceful. The holiday was over. Dishes were finally clean. The lights from the Christmas decorations outside glowed softly through the windows. Michael sat beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. "You heard what she said today." I nodded, unable to stop smiling.
Yeah.
He looked toward the staircase, where Emma's room was located. Then he said something that stayed with me forever. Sometimes the biggest victories don't look dramatic. He was right. There had been no emotional speech, no dramatic music, no life-changing announcement. Just 3 words spoken naturally. She's family. And somehow those words carried years of meaning. The strange thing was that despite all this progress, the word I secretly dreamed about still hadn't arrived. Not once. Not yet.
Mom.
The word remained absent. And honestly, by this point, I had almost stopped expecting it. Not because I didn't care. Because I had learned something more important. Love is not measured by titles. It is measured by actions. Emma already trusted me. She already cared. She already considered me family. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it always had been. Still, life has a funny sense of timing. Sometimes the moment you stop chasing something is exactly when it begins moving toward you. And that is precisely what was about to happen. Because Christmas was approaching. Our entire family would soon gather again. There would be laughter,
Stories.
presents, unexpected emotions, and one moment so surprising that even now, years later, I can still remember every detail. A moment involving a single word. A word I had waited years to hear. A word that was finally closer than I ever imagined. The day I never expected. If someone had asked me years earlier how this story would end, I probably would have described some dramatic movie scene. Maybe a heartfelt speech. Maybe tears. Maybe a perfect moment where everything suddenly made sense. But life rarely follows movie scripts. The most important moments often arrive when you're busy doing something completely ordinary. They appear quietly, unexpectedly, almost casually. Then later, when you look back, you realize your life was divided into 2 chapters, before that moment and after it. The Christmas season that year became exactly that kind of chapter for me. December arrived with its usual magic. Snow covered the rooftops. Neighborhoods glowed with holiday lights. Christmas music followed people everywhere. Stores became crowded. Children became excited. Adults became stressed. In other words, a completely normal American Christmas season. Our house felt especially lively that year. For the first time in a long time, everyone seemed genuinely happy. Emma's mother had fully recovered. School was going well. Family relationships felt stronger than ever. The difficult years seemed far away. Not forgotten. Just transformed into something different. Something valuable. One evening while decorating the Christmas tree, I noticed another small change in Emma. Years earlier, she would have stayed in her room. Now she was standing on a chair, hanging ornaments near the top branches. Michael was pretending to supervise, which mostly meant drinking hot chocolate and offering unhelpful advice. At one point, Emma held up an old ornament, a handmade one, simple, slightly crooked, the kind children create in elementary school. "When did I make this?" she asked. Michael smiled immediately. "2nd grade." Emma laughed. "It looks terrible." "No," I said. "It looks important." She stared at the ornament for a moment. Then she carefully placed it near the center of the tree. Not because it was beautiful, because it carried memories. That small moment reminded me of something psychologists often discuss. Human beings create identity through stories and shared experiences. Families are not just groups of people. They are collections of memories. And somehow, without realizing it, Emma and I had accumulated years of them. Movie nights, school projects, farmers markets, hospital visits, long conversations, quiet victories. The collection had become surprisingly large. A few days before Christmas, something unexpected happened. Our town experienced one of the largest snowstorms of the year. Roads closed. Schools canceled classes. Travel plans became uncertain. For several days, many families remained indoors, including ours. At first, everyone treated it like an inconvenience. Then it slowly became something else. A gift. With nowhere to go, we spent more time together than usual. Board games.
Cooking.
Watching old holiday movies. Sharing stories. Laughing. Living. One snowy afternoon, while Michael cleared the driveway, Emma and I remained inside baking cookies. At least that was the plan. Unfortunately, neither of us possessed exceptional baking skills. Several cookies burned. Others looked strangely shaped. One batch resembled small rocks. The kitchen became a disaster. Flour somehow reached locations that should have been physically impossible. At one point, Emma laughed so hard she nearly dropped an entire tray. I laughed too. The sound filled the room.
Warm.
Natural.
Easy.
Then something interesting happened. The laughter faded, but neither of us immediately spoke. The silence felt different from the silences years earlier. Comfortable.
Safe.
The kind of silence shared between people who trust one another. Then Emma looked at me, not casually, seriously, like she was considering something. For a brief moment, I thought she might say something important. Instead, she smiled and returned to decorating cookies. The moment passed, or so I thought. Christmas Eve finally arrived. Our families gathered together. The house overflowed with food, conversation, and holiday excitement. Children opened small gifts. Adults shared stories. Christmas music played softly in the background. Everything felt warm. Everything felt normal. And yet I couldn't shake a strange feeling, as if something important was approaching, not because of anything specific, just intuition. Maybe later that evening, after dinner, everyone gathered in the living room. Snow fell outside. The Christmas tree lights reflected softly against the windows. For a while, people simply enjoyed being together. Then Michael's mother suggested something. A family tradition. One person at a time would share something they felt grateful for.
Simple.
Meaningful. Harmless. The responses began predictably. Health.
Family.
Friendship. Recovery. Opportunities. One by one, people shared their thoughts. Eventually, it became Emma's turn. She looked slightly embarrassed, like most teenagers when attention suddenly focuses on them. Everyone waited. She glanced around the room. Then she began speaking. I'm grateful for a lot of things this year. Her voice sounded calm, confident, different from the quiet girl I first met years ago. She mentioned school,
Friends.
her mother getting better, her father. Then she paused. Only for a second, but long enough for everyone to notice. My heart suddenly started beating faster. I had no idea why. Maybe because she looked directly toward me. Maybe because something in her expression felt unusual. Then she smiled. Not the small guarded smile from years earlier. A real smile.
Warm.
Comfortable.
Certain.
And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Anticipation. Because deep inside, I sensed that whatever came next mattered. Very much. The room grew unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people instinctively know something meaningful is about to be said. Even the children seemed still. Emma took a breath, then opened her mouth to continue. What happened next lasted only a few seconds. Yet those few seconds would become one of the most unforgettable moments of my entire life. A moment that would finally answer a question I had carried for years. A moment involving one simple word. One word that had never been spoken before. One word that would change everything. And when that word finally arrived, nobody in the room was prepared for how emotional it would become. The word that changed everything. There are moments in life that last only a few seconds, but somehow live inside your memory forever. Not because they were loud, not because they were dramatic, but because they arrived after years of waiting, years of uncertainty, years of wondering whether all your effort had meant anything at all. If you ask me today what I remember most clearly about that Christmas Eve, it is not the decorations. It is not the snow falling outside. It is not even the gifts under the tree. What I remember most clearly is the silence. A silence that lasted only a heartbeat, but felt long enough to hold an entire lifetime. The living room had grown quiet. Everyone was listening. The Christmas tree lights glowed softly in the corner. Outside, snow drifted through the darkness. Inside, family members sat together holding cups of coffee, hot chocolate, and tea. It was Emma's turn to share what she was grateful for. She had already mentioned school, friends, her father, her mother's recovery. Then she paused. For a second, I wondered if she had simply forgotten what she wanted to say next. But something about her expression felt different. She wasn't searching for words. She was choosing them, carefully. The room remained silent. Then she looked directly at me and smiled. The kind of smile that comes from certainty. The kind of smile that appears when someone has already made an important decision. Then she spoke. And I'm grateful for my mom. For a brief moment, nobody reacted. Not because nobody cared. Because nobody expected it. Especially me. My brain actually struggled to process what I had heard.
Mom.
Not my first name. Not stepmom.
Not family. Mom.
A single word. 4 letters. Yet somehow it carried years of meaning. Years of tears. Years of patience. Years of showing up when it would have been easier to quit. I felt my eyes immediately fill with tears. Across the room, Michael looked stunned. His parents looked emotional. Even Emma seemed slightly surprised by her own words. As if she had finally spoken something that had been growing quietly inside her heart for a very long time. Then something even more remarkable happened. Emma stood up, walked across the room, and hugged me. Not a quick, awkward hug. Not a polite holiday hug. A real hug. The kind that communicates what words cannot. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there, holding on. The room remained completely silent. And honestly, I think everyone understood that something important was happening. Not because of the title. Not because of the word itself. Because of everything that word represented. Trust. Acceptance. Belonging.
Love.
The years between us suddenly felt visible. All at once. Like pages turning rapidly in a book. I remembered the first day I moved into the house. The cold silences. The one-word answers. The invisible wall. The school parking lot. The hospital visits. The snowstorm. The movie nights. The homework projects. The conversations. The setbacks. The victories. Every single moment seemed connected to this one. Psychologists often describe relationships as emotional investments. Trust compounds over time much like interest in a bank account. Small acts repeated consistently create powerful bonds. Looking back, I realized something important. The word mom had not appeared suddenly. It had been built. Day after day, year after year, without either of us fully noticing. After the hug ended, everyone eventually returned to their seats. The conversation continued. People smiled. A few tears were wiped away. The evening moved forward. Yet for me, everything felt different. Lighter, warmer, complete. Not because a title had changed, because a relationship had matured. Later that night, after guests left and the house grew quiet, I found Emma helping clean up wrapping paper and dishes. At one point, she glanced toward me, a little embarrassed,
A little shy.
then she laughed softly. I guess I surprised everyone. I laughed too. You definitely surprised me. She smiled. Then came a moment I will treasure forever. A moment far more important than the word itself. She shrugged and said, "It just felt true. That's all. No speech.
No explanation.
No dramatic story. It just felt true." And honestly, that was what made it so meaningful. Because genuine relationships cannot be forced. They cannot be demanded. They cannot be rushed. They grow naturally, like trees, like trust, like love. The next morning was Christmas Day. The house woke early. Coffee brewed. Presents were opened. Holiday music played. The usual excitement filled every room. Yet, throughout the day, I kept noticing something. Emma used the word again. Naturally. Without hesitation. Without awkwardness. As though it had always belonged there. And perhaps, in a way, it had. Not at the beginning. Not during the difficult years.
But now.
Now it fit. The experience taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. Many people give up too early. Not just in relationships. In everything. Learning English. Building confidence. Healing after loss. Creating friendships. Strengthening marriages. People often quit because they cannot see progress. They assume nothing is changing. But some of life's most meaningful transformations happen invisibly. Beneath the surface. Quietly.
Slowly.
The same way roots grow underground before a tree becomes visible. For years, I thought I was waiting for a word. What I was actually building was trust. And trust turned out to be far more valuable. Because titles can be spoken casually. Trust cannot. Love cannot. Belonging cannot. Those things must be earned through consistency. Through patience. Through showing up repeatedly when there are no guarantees. As the Christmas season came to an end, I found myself thinking about something Michael once told me years earlier. Trust grows so slowly you can't see it happening. At the time, I understood the sentence intellectually. Now I understood it emotionally.
Completely.
Because the little girl who once avoided every conversation now trusted me with her heart. And somehow, despite all the obstacles, despite all the years of uncertainty, despite every reason our story could have failed, we had become a family. Not perfect. Not magical. Just real. And sometimes real is the most beautiful thing of all. Still, the story was not quite over. Because one final lesson remained. A lesson about love, patience, family, and the surprising ways ordinary people change each other's lives. A lesson that would become the true ending of this journey. And it began with a simple realization during the first days of the new year. What I learned about love. A funny thing happens after you reach a destination you spent years chasing. At first, you expect fireworks. You expect some dramatic feeling of victory. You expect life to suddenly become perfect. But most of the time, real happiness arrives quietly. It sits beside you at the breakfast table. It laughs with you during ordinary conversations. It appears in small moments so simple that other people might not even notice them. That was the lesson waiting for me in the first weeks of the new year. After all the years of wondering whether Emma would ever truly accept me, After all the fears and setbacks and silent dinners and difficult seasons, I discovered something surprising. The word mom was not the ending of our story. It was simply proof of everything that had already happened. January arrived with cold Ohio mornings and fresh snow covering the neighborhood. Christmas decorations slowly disappeared from front yards. Children returned to school. Adults returned to work. Life resumed its normal rhythm. Yet inside our home, something felt different. Not dramatically different. Just lighter, easier, more natural. One morning I was standing in the kitchen making coffee when Emma walked downstairs. Half asleep, messy hair, still waking up. Without thinking, she said, "Morning, Mom." Then she grabbed a glass of orange juice and sat down. That was it. No emotional music. No dramatic reaction. No special moment. She simply said it naturally as breathing. And strangely, that ordinary moment touched me even more than Christmas Eve. Because it wasn't planned. It wasn't emotional. It was real. Psychologists often explain that habits reveal deeper truths than occasional actions. Anyone can do something meaningful once. Consistency is what reveals genuine connection. Hearing that word become part of everyday life told me something important. Emma wasn't trying to make me happy. She wasn't performing. She wasn't forcing anything. She simply meant it. Over the following months, I noticed other changes too. Not only in Emma, in myself. For years I had viewed love as something that needed proof. Some kind of confirmation. A sign. A title. A milestone. Now I understood that real love behaves differently. It shows up long before recognition arrives. It works quietly, patiently, without guarantees. Research on long-term relationships consistently shows that strong emotional bonds are built through repeated acts of reliability rather than dramatic gestures. In other words, trust grows when people repeatedly demonstrate that they will remain present. That idea suddenly explained everything. The school pickups, the science projects, the movie nights, the difficult conversations, the hospital visits. None of those moments felt life-changing at the time. Yet together they created something powerful. Something strong enough to survive fear. Strong enough to survive uncertainty. Strong enough to become family. One spring afternoon, several months later, Emma and I were walking through a local park. The trees were turning green again. Birds filled the air with sound. Families walked along the paths. Children played nearby. The world felt full of life. At one point, Emma asked a question. A simple question. The kind people often ask without realizing how important it is. Did you ever think about giving up? For a moment I smiled. Because the honest answer was obvious. Many times. She looked surprised. Really? I laughed softly. More times than you can imagine. Then I told her the truth. About the nights I felt discouraged. The moments I thought I would never be accepted. The days when progress seemed invisible. She listened carefully. Then she asked something else. Why didn't you? The question stayed in the air between us. Why didn't I give up? I thought for a moment before answering. Because the answer mattered. Finally I said, because loving someone isn't always about how they treat you today. Sometimes it's about believing in who they can become tomorrow. Emma became quiet. Very quiet. Then she reached for my hand. The same way she had done months earlier. Naturally. Comfortably. Without hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. Neither of us was the same person anymore. She had grown. I had grown. Our family had grown. The journey had changed all of us. Many people watching this story today may not be dealing with a stepdaughter. Maybe you're learning English. Maybe you're rebuilding a relationship. Maybe you're working toward a goal that feels impossible. Maybe you're putting effort into something that seems to give nothing back. If that's true, remember this. Progress often happens before you can see it. Seeds grow underground long before flowers appear. Trust grows quietly long before words change. Confidence develops silently long before success becomes visible. The human brain loves immediate results. Life rarely works that way. The most valuable things often require patience. Years later, when people ask me about Emma, they usually focus on the moment she first called me mom. It makes sense. It's a memorable moment. An emotional moment. A beautiful moment. But honestly, when I think about our story now, that isn't my favorite memory. My favorite memory is everything before it. Every ordinary day. Every difficult conversation. Every setback. Every small victory. Because those moments taught me the lesson that changed my life. Love is not built in grand moments. Love is built in ordinary moments repeated consistently. Family is not created by blood alone. Family is created by commitment, by presence, by patience, by showing up again and again when there is no guarantee of success. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this. Sometimes the people who seem farthest away are not rejecting you. Sometimes they are simply waiting to feel safe. The day Emma called me mom did not heal years of trying because of the word itself. It healed those years because the word revealed something that had been true for a long time. We had already become family. We just hadn't found the right word for it yet. And that is why, whenever someone tells me they are tired of trying, tired of learning, tired of hoping, tired of waiting, I remember our story. Because the breakthrough you are praying for may already be growing beneath the surface. Quietly, patiently, one ordinary day at a time. Sometimes the heart needs longer than the calendar. But when trust finally blooms, it often feels as though every difficult season was preparing you for that moment all along. Before you leave, let me ask you something. What if the thing you're ready to give up on today is actually closer to changing than you think? What if the English skills you're struggling to build are growing quietly every single day? And what if the breakthrough you're waiting for is already happening beneath the surface? For years, I thought I was waiting to hear one word. But life taught me a different lesson. The greatest changes rarely arrive with loud announcements. They grow quietly, in ordinary conversations, in difficult days, in moments when nobody is watching. The word mom was beautiful, but the real miracle was everything that happened before it. Every act of patience, every small effort, every time I chose not to quit. Because sometimes the reward for staying isn't just hearing the words you've been waiting for. Sometimes it's becoming the person who never gave up. If this story touched your heart, helped you practice English, or reminded you to keep going in your own life, take a moment and tell me in the comments, what is one thing you refuse to give up on? I read your comments, and your story may inspire someone else who needs hope today. And here's something exciting. In the next story, you'll meet another ordinary person living in America whose life changed because of one unexpected moment. A story filled with love, family, culture, real-life emotions, and simple English that will help you improve your listening, reading, speaking, and vocabulary naturally.
Trust me.
You won't want to miss it. So if you're enjoying these slow English stories, learn English through story, English listening practice, and American life stories, please support the channel by liking this video, leaving a comment, subscribing and turning on notifications, sharing the story with a friend who needs encouragement. Remember, your English improves one sentence at a time. Your confidence grows one day at a time. And sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of your life begin when you decide not to quit. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until our next story, keep listening, keep learning, keep believing, and keep turning the page. See you in the next slow English story.